One of the strangest phenomenons in this year's college football season has been the fall-off of pretty much every major quarterback prospect. Going into the offseason, guys like Carson Beck, Cade Klubnik, Drew Aller, Arch Manning, Sam Leavitt, and others were getting a ton of hype to be first-round picks, and then a guy by the name of Garrett Nussmeier. Some thought he was the most NFL-ready quarterback of them all. He was projected to go number 1 overall on a lot of mock drafts, and was also seen as the next great LSU quarterback after Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow's successes. But as we flash forward to almost the end of the season, Nussmeier is not even playing right now. He struggled mightily this year, ended up getting benched, and is now dealing with an injury. All of those factors have led to the conclusion that Nussmeier may not even get drafted this year, and in today's video, I want to talk about the rise and fall of Garrett. How did he become a big-time recruit? Why did he stick with LSU for so long? How did he gain so much attention? And what ended up happening to him? But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you can support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about what happened to Garrett Nussmeier. In order to understand how Nussmeier got to this point, we first need to go back in time. His father Doug played quarterback for the New Orleans Saints in the late 90s, and Garrett was born in Lake Charles, Louisiana. His dad eventually went into coaching, which led to an interesting life for Garrett. Being a coach's kid, he had moved 9 times, including the country of Canada, and he lived in so many different states and cities of different sizes, so adapting to life was something he had gotten used to. Because of his dad, he was always going to be a film junkie, as he remembers sitting in his dad's laptop watching film on Saturday nights and on Sunday mornings, and he's been doing that since he is 6 years old. He would throw the ball with his dad in the backyard a ton, and by the time he was 10, he was already developing a 3-step drop method and working to be a future college football quarterback one day. As he eventually got to high school, coaches figured out who Nussmeier was. In fact, they thought he was pretty dang good. He was a leader by the time he was a sophomore, and he also had arm talent, but he was doing all the little things right, like widening out receivers and managing games with a football IQ that few ever actually develop. On a Friday before a game Nussmeier's sophomore year, he asked his coach if he could watch film at 5 p.m. before a 7 p.m. game. That part wasn't too uncommon, but then Atkinson entered the room to find Nussmeier with the entire receiving corps. He saw a sophomore explaining to juniors and seniors, quote, "Alright, here's what I'm thinking pre-snap, here's what I'm going to do with the ball, and you better be ready." This floored Coach Atkinson, and he said, quote, "Garrett brings a lot to the table at the quarterback position. First, he's a great kid. Second, he's like having another assistant coach. Next to our offensive coordinator Coach Morrison and myself, I would say Garrett is the one with the most knowledge of what we do offensively." Because of this, his recruiting started to go crazy. He said, quote, "My phone is always buzzing. Typically I'll FaceTime at least 2 coaches a day, and I'll stay in contact with a lot of coaches every day, and it's been a fun and interesting time." But it wasn't always like that. Nussmeier was not familiar with LSU's coaching style the first time he threw for his future offensive coordinator Steve Espinger. He arrived in Baton Rouge for a 2018 Elite 11 camp, and at the time had no college offers. He hadn't even been a full-time varsity player yet, and he was an unknown commodity who just moved to Texas. He ended up throwing that day for both the OC and Coach Orgeron, but did not receive a particularly positive response. The coach got on him, and by the time they left, he looked at his dad and said, quote, "I don't think they liked me very much." He said the Tigers then eventually offered 2 days later, and he said, quote, "LSU was my first offer, and it was an amazing feeling to know that somebody as high profile as LSU offered you your first offer. It was pretty special." With the kind of season Garrett Nussmeier had in 2019, it was no wonder that college football's defending national champions came calling. He said, quote, "I understood that the offer was a, hey, we think you're going to be this, not you're an SEC caliber quarterback right now, and I took that as motivation." Basically, he was saying that it was a soft offer and not a full offer. He was saying that they liked his potential, but didn't like him who he was. He started setting alarms on his phone every morning and said, quote, "Prove them right." This provided him with something of a timeline to get to that level though. As a junior, he threw for 3,788 yards and 38 touchdowns and led his team to a district championship and 2 playoff victories. He improved his team from 5-5 to 11-2, and they even got to the regional quarterfinals in 2019. Nussmeier said him and his teammates enjoyed every single minute of it, and he had 30 offers to choose from, but after sorting through Arizona State and South Carolina, it was clear he was going to end up at LSU. It was easy for him to make LSU his program of choice. As his high school coach said, quote, "I think LSU is a good fit for a lot of reasons, but the 2 most prevalent are that 1, it is his dream to play for LSU. This is the school that he and his family have been cheering on for years, and how many times in your life do you get the opportunity to play for the team that you've always followed? And 2, Garrett is a big-time player who deserves to be among big-time players who play big games at the highest possible levels for their age group." A Lake Charles native, Nussmeier traveled all around the country, but he said the Bayou State was the place that draws him in the most. It's also part of the reason why he chose the Tigers, and he said, quote, "I think the most important thing about LSU for me was that it was home. Growing up, Louisiana has always been my consistent home, so my love for the state is very strong. My roots are in that state, and I will always think of it as my home." He ended up becoming the first quarterback to choose LSU since Joe Burrow became a Heisman winner, a national champion, and a number 1 overall draft pick. He's perhaps proof of the perception of change that happened at the LSU quarterback spot. Garrett ended up having a solid senior year, and eventually left high school football with a broken hand after leaving everything on the field. LSU was getting a really solid pickup, as according to 24/7 Sports, Garrett was a 4-star recruit, the number 14 quarterback, and the 84th best player in the class of 2021. So, how did he end up doing in Baton Rouge? Well, let's take a look. When he arrived at LSU, he was put into a very interesting spot. At the time, he would battle it out with both redshirt freshmen Max Johnson and TJ Finley, plus the starter from early 2020, Miles Brennan. Unfortunately, after he got hurt and then got in another fishing accident, he was out of commission, so there was a ton of strain on the LSU quarterback room. Many believed that Max Johnson would end up winning the job, and that is exactly what would happen, but for LSU fans, there was a 5-alarm fire beneath Max Johnson on the depth chart. Eventually, TJ Finley also transferred to Auburn, so Garrett Nussmeier might have a chance to play right away. While many thought he would just play some snaps in cupcake games, many also believed that he was a potential option for the future of LSU's offense, and not an underwhelming one by any means. In 2021, Nussmeier would end up appearing in 4 total games. He had a couple snaps against McNeese State and Central Michigan before he played a decent amount against Ole Miss, throwing for his first touchdown, and then playing a ton against Arkansas as he went 18 of 31 for 179 yards with a touchdown and 2 picks. They ended up losing to number 25 Arkansas in overtime, and Nussmeier finished his true freshman year with 329 yards and 2 touchdowns with 2 interceptions. Going into 2022, Max Johnson had left for Texas A&M. They had brought in 5-star recruit Walker Howard, and they also brought in Arizona State transfer Jaden Daniels. This was going to be a really weird quarterback room, and Nussmeier was likely going to get left out once again. He would end up appearing in 5 regular season games, throwing a touchdown against New Mexico and completing 13 passes against Southern. Eventually, though, he'd actually have to be forced to play in the SEC Championship game in 2022, and he actually played really well. He went 15 of 27 for 294 yards and 2 touchdowns with an interception. While LSU lost 50-30, this was a great moment for Garrett Nussmeier to showcase his future, to showcase his potential, and against one of the best defenses ever, he did really well. A following couple of weeks later in the Cheez-It Bowl against Purdue, Nussmeier once again got a chance. He completed 11 of 15 passes for 173 yards and 2 touchdowns as they beat Purdue 63-7. In total, Nussmeier threw for 800 yards with 5 touchdowns and 4 picks. Going into 2023, Walker Howard would leave for Ole Miss, Jaden Daniels would use his extra year of eligibility, and they would sign blue-chip recruit Ricky Collins after he would flip from Purdue to the Tigers. This left him in an interesting spot. Jaden Daniels was once again going to be the guy. It looked like they were already out recruiting him in the future. But he was loyal to LSU, and he wanted to stay there. He could have gone to another big-time program and earned the starting job, but it was the only place he wanted to be, and he remained loyal to Brian Kelly and LSU, despite losing the quarterback battle. In total, in the regular season, Nussmeier would appear in 5 total games. He'd go 4 of 6 against Grambling with his first career rushing touchdown, and then he threw a touchdown against Army in late October. He also got a chance to play against Alabama a little bit. He was once again just a backup quarterback. Things would eventually change though. They'd end up getting to a bowl game against Wisconsin, and Garrett Nussmeier would make his first start since December 4th of 2020. On his senior night, he threw for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick, and now Garrett Nussmeier would once again make a start in the college level. This was due to Jaden Daniels opting out because of the 2024 NFL Draft, and in his first career start against Wisconsin, Nussmeier would impress. He completed 31 of 45 passes for 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a 69% completion percentage. Garrett Nussmeier ended up beating the Badgers 35-31, and this was a huge moment for him. He proved that he was the next guy up, and bowl games are typically a good indicator of who's next, and Garrett Nussmeier showed that he's going to be the guy. In total last year, he finished with 591 yards, with 4 touchdowns and 1 pick, with obviously 1 more score on the ground. Nuss would take over as the starting quarterback in 2024 and helped LSU get off to an incredible start. Nuss would lead them to a 6-0 start, in which he had a couple of huge games, including 6 touchdowns against Nicholls State, 4 against South Alabama, and then 3 in a win over number 9 Ole Miss. After a win over Arkansas, LSU was looking like they were going to make the college football playoff, but then they would hit a November slump. Against number 14 Texas A&M, Nussmeier would attempt 50 passes, but despite having 3 touchdowns, he would have 3 interceptions, and that would prove to be costly, and they lost. Nussmeier then played terrible against Alabama with 2 picks, and also was subpar in a loss to Florida. LSU went from being in the driver's seat for a playoff spot to now being done. Luckily, he would finish out the season with 2 wins, as they would beat both Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. He had 3 touchdowns against the Sooners. They had then qualified to play in the Texas Bowl against Baylor, and in that game, he had 3 touchdowns. Nussmeier ended up having a really good season, as he threw for 4,052 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 12 picks, with 3 more scores on the ground. Nussmeier could have gone off to the 2025 NFL Draft, but he would decide to come back for 1 more season. I think he would have been a day 2 pick then, but if he came back in 2025, he could play his way into being the number 1 overall pick. He was in the same category as players like Cade Klubnik, Lenora Sellers, Drew Aller, Carson Beck, and Sam Levitt, but many thought that Nuss was the most pro-ready of them all and had the most long-term potential to fit in the league. Unfortunately, so far this year, Nussmeier has not lived up to the hype. In his very first game against Clemson, he would lead them to a win over quote-unquote number 4 Clemson, and he only had 1 touchdown. He wasn't great. Against Louisiana Tech, he had 1 touchdown and 1 interception, and it was the same story against Florida, as he had 1 touchdown and 1 interception in that one, despite them getting 5 interceptions against DJ Lagway. That's when people were starting to raise some alarm bells, as he wasn't playing well against anybody. He did have 4 touchdowns against Sela, but that was an FCS school. He'd then get back to playing good competition, and he struggled against Ole Miss. He had less than 200 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 pick, and they dropped their first game in the season at number 4. Just like last year, the wheels began to fall off, but this time it was a lot earlier. Despite 2 interceptions, they would still find a way to beat South Carolina, and in the last few games, things have just collapsed for him. Against number 17 Vanderbilt, Nussmeier didn't have a great day, as he only had 2 touchdowns in that game, but they would end up losing. Nussmeier would end up saying after that game, "At the end of the day, football is a game where you're never fully really healthy, so it is not necessarily about that for me. It's just trying to get the pieces going and trying to get us right on track on offense. So there's definitely a little bit of a confidence booster that I'm starting to feel better. I'd be lying if I said differently." What Nussmeier was alluding to is the fact that he's been dealing with some sort of injury all year. Things wouldn't get much better against Texas A&M, as he go 22 of 35 for 1 touchdown, and they get blown out 49-25 in that game. Then things reached a breaking point, as against Alabama, he would complete 18 of 21 passes, but he wasn't making plays. He had neither a touchdown or an interception, and he was benched in the 3rd quarter due to an ineffective offense. He also took a significant sack in the red zone, which would force LSU to settle for a field goal instead of actually scoring a touchdown. Then we found out news that he was going to suffer through an abdominal injury, and he would miss the game against Arkansas. Michael Van Buren ended up leading LSU to a 23-22 win, and now it looks like Nussmeier is done for the season. Interim head coach Frank Wilson said he's, quote, "not sure how the injury affects him, but Michael Van Buren will start in his place." As of right now, Nussmeier's 2025 season may finish with these numbers: 1,927 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. He's only completed 67% of his passes, and the only good game on his resume came against an FCS school. Man, who could have ever thought this would happen? Going into the offseason, Daniel Jeremiah ended up saying, quote, "Scouting Garrett Nussmeier is shades of Andy Dalton, Brock Purdy, and Tony Romo." Man, that ended up being wrong. If anybody would have told you that in mid-November, Garrett Nussmeier would not be playing, they would have called you crazy. They would have thought it was some sort of freak injury. That is not the case, though. It's a combination of the injury, bad offensive line play, inconsistent chemistry with the receivers, and honestly a style of play that doesn't really mix. He also had crippling expectations, and personally, I thought he was always overrated. I thought he was an above-average starter, but everybody acted like he was the next big thing just because he put up good numbers at the same school that Jane Daniels and Joe Burrow did. I felt that was greatly influencing everybody's thought process on Nussmeier, and at this point, I think he needs to get healthy and start preparing for next year's draft. While some think he'll end up going undrafted, I think if guys like Graham Mertz can get drafted, there's no reason why Nussmeier won't be taken in day 3, and he'll have a chance to maybe develop over time and maybe one day become an NFL player. For now though, he needs to heal, go back to the drawing board, and hopefully things get fixed here soon. But what do you guys think? If you're an LSU fan, what went wrong for Garrett Nussmeier? How do you guys think he'll do at the next level? And what other players should I take a look at next? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you can support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.